Good morning. Can you hear me? Okay, hi. I am so honored to be here with educators from all over the world. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm going to talk today a little bit about my story in my first grade classroom with my students and how we would assess them and test them. And I was realizing it wasn't the right picture of what they knew. So what I would like to talk about is, I'm just going to take a look here. It's not right there. That's okay. That's all right. Okay. I knew that my standardized assessments that we were taking in the classroom were not the true measures of what my students knew. I want you to think for a second, if you've ever watched your students taking a test with paper pencil, multiple choice, and you're walking by your students and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I know you know this. Why are you not answering it right? So when you think of your national assessments or your building level tests that you all have to do, so many times I would say, that's not the student. He knows more than that. So what I thought was, is there something else that we can do to test what students know? I also knew that my first grade students, when they would go to second grade, they weren't always transferring their knowledge. So I would teach my students their addition facts and their subtraction facts. I know that I taught them how to tell time. I watched them tell time, and then they would go to the next year, and the teachers would say, they don't know how to tell time. They don't know their addition. They don't know their subtraction. And I would be like, I taught them this. I know I did. So essentially, the knowledge was not transferring. So in the journey to try to solve this problem, I thought, what kind of assessments could we do that would truly measure what a student is able to do? And I thought, student engagement, right there. So if we take a step back and we take a look at the big picture, when are students engaged? I know in my classroom, students are engaged when they're working together. Students are engaged when they're playing games. Students are engaged when they're talking. And most of all, students are engaged when they are solving real-world problems, when they know that their learning has a purpose. So I want you to think for a second, when was the last time you looked at your students and you said, wow, they are truly here today. They are interested. And keep that thought in your head. And that's going to help you in your journey with making performance assessments. If we keep this in mind, everything will come together. Performance assessments are authentic. That is the real world problems they're going to solve. We as teachers are going to make these assessments because we know our students best. And we need to show that when we assess students and we use authentic problems, that's how we measure student growth. Not by a generic assessment built by somebody that isn't in our building. We need to start with authentic assessments. Now that takes a lot of work. I'm not saying, okay, I'm going to build one tomorrow. But today I'm going to give you the pieces of a performance assessment so you can try one. Try a piece of it. Performance assessments have a higher cognitive rigor. That means we're asking questions beyond multiple choice. We're asking questions that are beyond just memorization. Those are some good things that a student needs to have. But you know what? That's just the start. They need to take that information and they need to transfer it into solving a real-world problem. So that's the higher cognitive skills right there. Excuse me. I really love the third one up there. Performance assessments are not an event. I don't know if you can relate to this, but when we have state testing at my school, it's like the building shuts down. All of our fun activities during the day are gone, and students really feel that pressure. As a teacher, I felt that pressure. So imagine that anxiety and that pressure that we give to our students when we have this big event of testing. So performance assessments are embedded into our units so they feel more realistic, and that way the student is giving us everything they've got. All right, so let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Let's try to build a performance assessment. I'm going to show you the pieces of one, and then I'm going to show you an example I made. And it's not perfect, and it's not the best one ever, but it's one of the first ones that I built, and I'm going to show it to you so I can inspire you to make one yourself. Try one. And I guarantee you do activities like this in your classroom. So maybe I'm here to just give you that inspiration and that motivation to build upon it and share it with others. This is a site that is very useful to me, and I'm sharing it with you. So on the Center for Collaborative Education, there is some information on what a performance assessment is. There are so much information, right? It's like, I can't keep it all. All these people telling you all these things you need to know. I'm going to tell you the 3 important aspects of a performance assessment. Okay, higher cognitive rigor, which would mean a depth of knowledge 3 or 4 type of question. So a depth of knowledge 1 or 2 type of question would be some regurgitation of information. So you're asking them to memorize. A depth of knowledge 2 question would be procedures. Those are great. But a 3 or 4 is when we're asking students to analyze. We're asking students to take something that they've practiced, maybe with memorization, and transfer it to a real-world problem. I utilize the Hess rigor matrix, but there are plenty of depth of knowledge charts out there that you can utilize in your building. So I would suggest you do some research on that end and use a common depth of knowledge chart with your colleagues in your building. But they are all just push towards higher cognitive rigor. So that's the first important part of your performance assessment. The second performance part is we would like, sorry, I can't read it. Oh, okay. Open-ended, okay. Open-ended. So not every student has to have the same answer, and that's okay. And you're probably asking, well, how are we going to grade it? I think when we look at an example, you'll see how I took upon that challenge. And then the last common part is we do need to connect our performance assessments to standards. So you have your building level standards or your state level standards or your national standards. You connect them to those. All right. So here is the development process. I think I mentioned this already. You pick your standards that you want to assess. I know that in my district, in my first grade reading standards, I had 37 reading standards. How am I supposed to assess 37 times? As a teacher, I looked at those standards and I picked the one standard that I thought was the anchor standard, the one that was had the most leverage, where maybe some other standards fit underneath it. So I picked the strongest standard, and that was the one that I was going to focus on in my assessment. I started brainstorming with my colleagues about ideas for a task, and then we made sure that it was a DOK, a depth of knowledge, 3 or 4 type of task. Here are the standards that we use in New Hampshire. So this one is a reading literature one. And it's actually easier to start a performance task with a math problem. It's very concrete. I'm showing you a reading one today, because reading is hard to assess. And with this standard, I was assessing students' understanding of comprehension in fictional texts. And this is on a first grade level. So I want to know if students are understanding what they read. And I want to know it on a deep level. I don't want them to just tell me the characters, because I know when they just retell a story to me, they don't remember it the next year. It's that transfer of knowledge. I need to have a deep assessment that I know if they can do this, then they are ready to move on. They are ready to tackle even more challenging work. I also connected my performance tasks to some 21st century skills. So they realized that their performance assessment is all-encompassing. It has a purpose in the world, and so when you come to school and I give you an assessment, you can use this information later in life. Yes, this is a first grade student, but why not get them now? Why not show them right now that their learning has a purpose, and what you're doing in the classroom, you can do anywhere else? That is a lofty goal, but as an educator and as a teacher, I want my students to feel like they have a purpose in the classroom and that I see them. Okay, so here was the task. It is very fun for a first grader. I got to read 2 stories to them. These 2 titles were Jamaica's Find and Too Many Tamales. Great read-alouds, wonderful pictures. My students could not read this book, not all of them, but they could hear me. And remember, I'm testing comprehension, not if they can read the words. I'm testing if they understand. So I read these 2 books to them, and then I said, okay, fill out a Venn diagram to compare and contrast. That is a DOK 2, a depth of knowledge 2 activity. I'll go back, don't worry. Okay, so here's my student, Kaylee. She listened to Too Many Tamales, and she listened to Jamaica's Find. And I wanted her to talk about how they were the same and how they were different. Has anybody done a Venn diagram before? Yes, we do this. We're educators. We're first grade teachers. We do this in elementary school. We do this all the way up to high school. But I didn't stop here, because this is a depth of knowledge too. She's just telling me information. Now I have to have her take her information and transfer it and answer a real world problem. So here's what I decided. I said, Kaylee, you read this story. You were able to understand it. But can you now pull out a common theme from these 2 stories? All right, we're getting a little bit more challenging. I'm making her pick out a common theme. And then, what was the lesson learned? I'll go back. I'm sorry, I know I'm rushing. I want to go here. So I gave this to Kaylee to help her with her thoughts, because I realize she's a first grader. So I'm going to help her reach a depth of knowledge 3 or 4, but she's going to do the work on her own, but I'm going to scaffold it. So she had to write down the common theme. And then in my school, we use something called CARES, C-A-R-E-S. And it's our 21st century skills that students work towards every day. And I said, Kaylee, what CARES is that lesson learned connected to? So here's that transfer. She's realizing that 2 books that she reads have a lesson learned, and that lesson learned is for her. because she can relate it to cares. So did she pick cooperation? Did she pick assertion? Did she pick responsibility, empathy, or self-control? I'm going to skip ahead a few slides, and I'm going to show you her end product, and we'll go back to how I graded her, okay? So Kaylee said honesty, and she told me that, Mrs. Lizier, honesty is related to assertion. Because assertion, gosh, to be honest, you really have to get outside the box and ask and tell your teacher something or tell your parent something that maybe you're scared to do. I said, yes, Kaylee, you're right. That is assertion. This was the picture of cares in my classroom. I let her look at this poster if she needed some help to identify what lesson learned was connected to the cares in our classroom. So it was very purposeful, this performance task. This is something she knew. And here's her student work. She made a poster. And, I tricked her a little bit because I wanted to make this a real-world problem, and she's a first grader, so I can trick first graders. I said, oh, Kaylee, I need you to make a poster for our guidance counselor. She does not know how to teach assertion. She has no idea what to tell kids. Can you make a poster for her and maybe suggest some books she could read to kids about assertion? And Kaylee's like, oh yeah, I can do that. I'll draw the best picture ever. So I just played on it, and she gave me the best work that I'd seen. Better than any other assessment I've given. So both of these pictures are the characters in the story being honest and telling their mother what they did, because they did something naughty in each book. And she's telling everybody this is what assertion looks like. So it's very cute. Okay, so this is the fun stuff. This took about 3 days. First, I had to read the stories, then they did the Venn diagram, and then they made the poster, and they made the connection to cares. Great. And it was fun, and students were invested, and they were engaged. But now I have the responsibility as a teacher to identify if they were able to master the standard that I originally went out for. Remember the comprehension standard at the beginning? So I have to check that. So how do I grade this? I can't just mark off what's right or wrong. I have to build a rubric. Has anybody here built a rubric before? Rubrics are my least favorite thing to build. They're hard. And I am very lucky that I worked with a group of teachers, and we built the rubric together. Then we gave the assessment, we looked at student work, and we went back and fixed our rubric. So I'll show you the rubric that we made for this one, but please know that rubrics change, and it's something that I struggle with. It definitely is, and it's okay to build one, give the assessment, and change it. Your rubrics will get better if you keep looking at student work. If you remember, one thing out of all my babbling today, look at student work and feel okay to fix it. So let me go back to the rubric. Okay. I know I have 10 minutes. Okay. So in our district, the school I was in, we had 4 levels: limited progress, inconsistent progress, proficient, and exceeding. So proficient means like you're good, you got it. Exceeding means, you know what, you got it, and it's time, let's move on, let's push you harder. Let's move you to the next standard or the next competency. Inconsistent means, you could do it, but you needed a little help. And limited progress means, okay, as a teacher, I need to do some reteaching for sure. This rubric probably changed 2 times already, and when we give it again, or when they give it again at my previous school, they will continue to change it. I put the cares on there as well to connect the 21st century skills. Okay. So we were doing this in the classrooms, and we were building performance assessments. We started with math. So that might be a place where you want to start. Pick a math standard that's a really heavy one and a really important one to you. Build a task. Check it, make sure it's a depth of knowledge 3 or 4, and see if another teacher wants to join you in this process so you can look at student work together. So we started doing these performance tasks, putting them in our grade book as grades, and eventually, New Hampshire decided, wow, like as a state of New Hampshire, they said these performance tasks, they really show what students know better than our, sometimes better than our state testing. So there's a district in New Hampshire, or a couple districts in New Hampshire that are a part of New Hampshire PACE. Right here. And these schools have developed performance assessments so well and have looked at student work so well that they are able to use performance assessments like the one that I showed you instead of state testing. And now that was exciting for these districts. That's the end goal to me. As a classroom teacher, as a curriculum coordinator, I want to put the trust back into the teacher in creating assessments. And I want the assessment credibility to be strengthened on the teacher end. So when I give an assessment, the state trusts me when I say, yes, they are meeting expectations. So it's very exciting. And I believe that we can do this all over the world. But you have to start somewhere. And so you start with yourself and a colleague building one performance assessment at a time. And there are some out there already. If you visit performanceassessmentresourcebank.org, there are performance assessments built by teachers on that site. Now, remember we talked about how performance assessments need to be part of your instruction and they're not an event. So if you borrow somebody else's performance assessment and use it, please feel free to change it and make it fit your school day. So if you're doing a unit on electricity, you don't want to take a performance assessment that would not fit into that, but rather take pieces of other people's performance assessments or their types of questions and change it to fit your own. The power of a teacher's knowledge together is overwhelming. You and your colleagues working together, examining student work, deciding what standards are those leverage standards, those most important standards, and building assessments from there are key. So I'm here today to teach you a little bit about this, but also to empower you to try it, and don't be scared to give an assessment and have it fail, because I did that many times, and that's okay, because I would look at student work, I would change my teaching practices, and try again. So I'd like to say that what I gave you today is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just a little bit of information to kind of get you motivated to try something, give you some inspiration to try something. It's not easy work, but it's the right work for kids. I don't want my daughter to be measured on how well she answers a multiple choice question. I want my daughter to be measured on how she applies her skills and on how she solves real-world problems. My daughter's 3, so I have some time to keep working with schools, and schools are doing amazing things. But let's do this together, and let's start somewhere. And thank you. Thank you, thank you. Obrigada.